The business of medicine is constantly changing. The review by Resolve discusses current contract issues for physicians, compensation trends, and tips for a successful career. Every physician's contract and career is different, and nothing in this episode should be considered legal advice. If you have specific questions about your career, please consult with an attorney. Now, on to the show.
Okay, welcome back to the review, where we talk all things physician contracts. Today we are joined by Dr. Leif Dahleen. I appreciate you coming on the show. I'm going to start my first questions on your bio, actually. You're an anesthesiologist, or are you a former anesthesiologist? How do you define yourself?
That's a great question. I think both answers are acceptable, honestly. I think once an anesthesiologist, always an anesthesiologist in many ways. Once a physician, always a physician. But yeah, you could put an asterisk at the end and say former, say retired, semi-retired, although I haven't seen an operating room of any kind in over 6 years now, which is pretty crazy. Yeah.
Well, and that leads to the next piece. If you don't know who Dr. Dahleen is, he's the founder of Physician on Fire, and is part of and maybe one of the leading voices in that FIRE movement. And so I want to maybe just dive right into that. It's been 6 years since you've been in the OR. Do you want to just start back and kind of walk us through your path to FIRE, where kind of the concept came from, how it evolved, how it's played out? Give us kind of the 30,000 foot view.
Absolutely, and I'll try to keep it relatively brief because I could talk about this for an hour. But
sure.
I was working in my career, 8 or 9 years in, and studying for a board exam, and thinking about taking it again 10 years later. And right around that time, and this would have been about 2014, I happened to see an article about this guy who called himself Mr. Money Mustache, and he wrote on the internet about a very early retirement and all of the math that goes behind it, all of the research that's been done around it, and all of the lifestyle things that are possible with it. And I wasn't really in a place where I was thinking, oh, I might retire in 3 or 5 years, but maybe 10, 15, 20, maybe once we have the empty nest when I'm in my mid-50s, something like that. But I looked at my finances, and we had been living in the upper Midwest. I had saved, I would say, quite a bit more than the average physician, and I was investing back when the stock market was quite low, when things kind of tanked in 2007, 8, 9. That was the beginning of my career. Sure. And having done that, by at the time I was nearly a decade into my career, those investments had done very well. My savings rate that probably hovered in the 30 to 60% range, depending on what we were doing, turned out to be quite a boon. And I found out that I was more or less financially independent based on our current spending level at that time, which 10, 12 years ago was something like 60, 70,000 a year, because I already paid off my student loans, I'd already paid off the mortgage,
Sure.
And we lived more like a teacher family or accountant, or so. We didn't live like the high-end physician lifestyle. We didn't drive luxury cars. We had a nice home, but we didn't have like the nicest home in town. Actually, I did when I took my first permanent job. You can make some mistakes and still recover. But long story short, I realized that my career could be a lot shorter than I had anticipated. And while I enjoyed being a doctor and liked the work that I did, I always enjoyed my time off even more. And I, kind of had a idea of traveling the world with my kids when they would be like middle school age, junior high age, kind of skip some of those really awkward years. And homeschooling would be easy enough, and it's even easier now with all the online resources that are out there, and so on. And so that's what we ended up choosing to do. So like I said, it was 2019 when I did pull that trigger. Yeah.
I'm curious, you said something 30 to 60%, I think was the number that you gave as far as maybe what you were saving. That's a post-tax number? Or pre-tax number?
Yes, that would be post-tax. Yeah.
Post-tax, okay. So when we talk to, young clients, I'm going to call them either residents and fellows or people that are, maybe switching jobs in the first couple of years, and they're looking at their contracts, there's always this balance, and they're trying to decide, how much they're trying to protect themselves from what I call quality of life, right? So how much call am I going to take? How many days of the week am I going to work? And as opposed to how much compensation should I be trying to maximize, right? Whether that's signing bonuses on changing jobs, or whether that's, a high base salary or a high, work RVU conversion factor. Different specialties, right, have different, metrics on that. But if the goal of a young physician is to pursue the same path you did, right, and retire early, how would you advise them to balance those things? Because we know burnout's, a real thing, right? And so we want to protect the time, but we also probably need to maximize earnings if we're going to try to retire early. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, my approach, I had just finished residency, and in residency, you work pretty darn hard, right? You put in long hours, you get paid very little, but you manage and you get through. And I figured I can work less than I did then, but probably more than the average doctor. I could have 4 to 6 weeks off instead of 2 or 3. That's double now, and still set aside a lot of money. So I kind of said, well, let's make hay while the sun is shining. I didn't know what the future might bring in terms of physician compensation and that sort of thing. So my approach was to work pretty hard, not quite as hard as residency, but again, I wasn't like, oh, I need this big break, I need to work part-time, like right from the get-go. That wasn't my attitude at all. I didn't know what I was saving for necessarily, but I knew it was, I knew what compound interest could do and all of that. So I opted to go for more compensation, and probably went a little overboard on that. I know I worked like the first 25 weeks straight. I did locums work and didn't take a week off until after Christmas, or right around Christmas. So yeah.
So one of the things contractually that you must have had in your contract was the ability to do locum work, right? A lot of the contracts come in that we're seeing today, and they really don't encourage that. You have to get approval for outside activities. You have to get approval to go do locum work. Did you have any problems getting approval to do those things, or was your contract structured the right way?
Well, the first half of my career, I did nothing but independent contractor work. I did 2 years of locums, came back to one of those places, worked essentially full-time or more than full-time, but basically with an extension of something that looked a lot like a locums contract. Sure. So it wasn't until 2011 or 12 that I took an actual employed position and signed an employment contract. It was with a new hospital in Aberdeen, South Dakota, not too far from where you guys are at. Yeah. And it was a brand new hospital in town. So like the hours were, let's say, beyond ideal. There was not a lot of work in a brand new hospital, right? Starting from scratch. Sure. In a town that used to have only one hospital. And so, but also I felt like I didn't have a lot of negotiating power. They were going to be 3 doctors, 3 anesthesiologists. They, we, at least in my mind, we would all get the same deal, and that was that. So I didn't think too much about that. It was a good offer, and I took it. And doing locums there, well, when I started, the hospital wasn't even open yet. So I said, I want to do some work to keep my skills up. And they said, okay, that's fine, but the money you make will come to us. And actually I thought that was fair, because I was doing very little, next to nothing, a few meetings a week, sort of thing. So I did that. My next job, they did forbid locums. No, well, not quite. You had to arrange it through them. Your paycheck would come to the employer. This was Brainerd, Minnesota. And then it would come to me through them. It seemed awkward. I was at a point in my career where I didn't feel a need to do locums work at that point. I did some in between jobs, that sort of thing, but no. So that is an important point, though, because you want to have the ability to earn extra if you find yourself with more downtime than you need, that you feel you need. So
did you, or maybe I should frame it as how often, did you go back and renegotiate as an employee? Independent contractor, probably a little bit different, but what was your cadence on looking at, am I being paid fairly?
Yeah, I probably should have met you a few years earlier than I did, because I really didn't revisit those things. I felt like we were paid pretty fairly in both jobs that I had, and I didn't have any real disputes with my employers, so I just kind of went with the flow. Yeah.
Okay. Um, give me a takeaway on one thing you've learned throughout the fire journey, or one thing maybe you would have done differently.
Well, I mean, I did talk about working rather excessively early on. I don't regret it, but I think it does not work for everyone. I think the biggest takeaway that I could offer when you're looking at different jobs, looking at different contracts, it's one half of the equation to reach financial independence, to calculate your savings rate. It's how much you earn. The other half is how much you spend. And so where you choose to live, where you choose to work, where you call home, the quality of the public schools, so many different factors go into cost of living. But if your cost of living can be pretty good at 150,000 a year, in one place, and the other place might require 250, 300,000 a year because you have 2 or 3 kids, and maybe the private schools are, what most doctors, send their kids to, most people in a certain neighborhood. It's going to take just so much longer to reach those financial goals you have when your cost of living is higher. And so, it's not really in the contract, but when you're comparing jobs, you're comparing metro areas, comparing hospitals, comparing places, even the house you choose, in a particular area. What school district is it in? Are they generally happy with their public schools? That sort of thing can be huge if you have children. And yeah, so it's all about the difference. I say mind the gap. I'm going to London in a couple of weeks. They have the sign by the subway, mind the gap. And the gap I'm talking about is the difference between what you make and what you spend.
Yeah. And you mentioned, you didn't say the word geographic arbitrage, but it's a term that's out there where, if you want to live in, I think you said Aberdeen and Bemidji, Minnesota, those are not, for people watching this, these are not major metro areas, right? And so
Right.
it's almost in physician comp, it's almost backwards of what every other occupation has. Like if you're in finance, you go to New York and you earn far more in New York than you would, right, in Iowa maybe. It's the
Right.
opposite in physicians, right? It's the more rural you get, the higher the salaries tend to be.
On average,
and
yeah,
so-
that tends to be the way it goes. And I did write a post about that too, and I called it geographic arbitrage, why the Great Plains are great. And there's a map, and it, the bright red was like right through, the Dakotas, Nebraska, on down to Oklahoma, and those opposite, cool colors, maybe cool places to live too, depending on your perspective. But they tend to be, lower salaries, and they tend to be on the coast in the more populous areas where people tend to gravitate.
Yeah, it's just supply and demand, right? I mean, the more physicians that want to live there, it tends to drive down, right, the earning power. And so then if you have higher costs of living on top of that, your equation, top line is going down and your bottom line is going up. It may not be very helpful if you're trying to move in that same direction. So,
Right. And it's not for everyone too, and like,
yeah.
I grew up in a small town in the upper Midwest, and so I was happy to, live and work in those places. And the same goes for my wife. There are people I know that would never want to step foot in places like that, and I think they could be a little more open-minded. But if you've got family in a certain place, if you have cultural things, you've got a lot of different reasons where people want to live where they want to live. But it's a consideration, and money isn't the only thing, but it is certainly an important factor, especially when we're talking about fire.
Yeah, well, and I was just going to say, the fire concept is interesting because it is money, right? I mean, we're working on this math equation, but we're also talking about getting to a point where our quality of life is maybe more important than working, and so it's this fine balance or interesting, kind of how do we get there quickest conversation. Do you think it's the ability to retire early has gotten better or worse as physicians have shifted towards an employed model?
Well, I guess what I've seen, you've got employed models and then private equity too, taking over practices that maybe were fairly lucrative and did pay their physicians really well prior to the acquisition. So I think what you're seeing is some of the most lucrative jobs are becoming fewer and further in between. You don't have maybe as much disparity, as much variation of salary within a specific specialty or geographic area. There's still some jobs out there that are at the 90th percentile and above. There always will be, but maybe that bell curve isn't as wide. Maybe it's a little more of a narrow peak as opposed to a big spread.
Yeah. Do you think, or I shouldn't ask what you think, I should say, do you know, what percentage of physicians are currently saying that they're pursuing the same fire path that you took? Do you know?
I would guess it is under 10%, probably under 5%.
Okay.
I don't know, but
yeah.
From what I've seen, what I hear, and of course I hear from the people that are pursuing it, and those are the people that are sending emails and commenting on blog posts and that sort of thing. So it would be easy for me to say, oh gosh, it seems like a lot, but in the realm of there being, maybe 1 million practicing physicians, I would guess it's probably a 5-figure number, not 6.
Okay. Yeah. Just the reason I asked,
and that's okay. That's a good thing. Right?
Well, I was going to agree with you.
In general,
we need physicians, and so there's already a shortage. And if all of you retire early, we're going to be in a really bad spot. So, I think it's great for some, but I hope not for everyone, actually.
Right, and achieving financial independence doesn't have to mean retiring early, and I've certainly talked about that quite a bit. It's it's a path that I took, but it's not for everyone, and I hope most physicians can find happiness in the work that they do, and I think it's easier when you don't have the financial constraints on you that you feel like you have to do this, that, or the other thing that maybe you don't want to do. And achieving financial independence gives you that. It gives you leverage, in terms of, we're talking contracts. Once you are in a place where you don't need the money, you can say, I don't think I'm going to take call every third night. I think that I'm not going to do those Whipple procedures anymore. Let's, bring in a young doc. Maybe we'll split call. All those sorts of things. You have the leverage to walk away. You have the leverage to say, this is what I want and need, and I do have options if you can't provide.
Yeah. I think the question that you probably have been asked a 1,000 times, but how do you know what the number is? What's the number for people to say, yeah, now I'm financially independent, I can do this?
The simplest answer that I have is you need to know about what you spend per year, or what you would spend if you weren't working, for your family, for whoever you're supporting, for yourself if you're single. Multiply that by 25 or 30, and that gives you a ballpark figure. So if you're spending $100,000 a year, 2.5 to 3 million. If you're spending $200,000 a year, 5-6 million, and that would, assuming it's invested in, primarily stocks and bonds. The studies that were done looked at, 50 to 75% stocks, 25% to 50% bonds. They looked at the last 100 years and looked for points of failure, or they did like a Monte Carlo simulation where they simulated a bunch of different scenarios and lined up the different years side by side and looked at what would it take for someone to run out of money in let's say a 30 to 50 year time span. And if you spend something around 4% or less, you're very unlikely, like less than 3% odds of running out of money. And of course that assumes that you only adjust your spending with inflation. Every year it goes up with inflation, no adjustments up or down. And so if you have a bit of a cushion there, or you're living a pretty comfortable lifestyle and you're worried, boy, what if we have the worst 5 or 10 year period in the stock market that we've seen in the last century, maybe you could cut back on your spending a little bit, maybe 20%, 10% in those years, and still come out okay, right? So there's a lot of debate about the specifics, the exact number. It doesn't have to be exact. Life is never quite what you expect it to be in terms of all sorts of things, including expenses. And so I say 25 to 30 times what your anticipated retirement spending would be.
Sure.
That should do it.
Sure. So from a contract standpoint, since this is a contract show,
right,
I'm going to make an assumption on what the most important piece of the contract is to get down this fire path, but I'd be curious on your take. What is the most important thing folks should focus on if this is their goal?
early on, compensation, because time time and money, they work well with one another. So, earning well in your early years, I think is great. I think once you are, let's say, halfway to that FI number, or time frame that you had in mind, or maybe a little more than halfway, you can take your foot off the gas, and then maybe you can start to focus a little more on lifestyle. What I did was I worked more than full-time early on. I worked full-time for 10 years or so, and then I worked part-time the last 2 years. And that gave me a chance to kind of try on retirement. I would have 3 to 4 weeks off at a time, and I'd work a week and a half. And I'd take my family. We went to like Hawaii for 3 weeks. We went to Mexico for 3 weeks. Like, this is kind of like a sample of what we want to do, for the first 3 or 4 years once I do retire, which we ended up doing. But yeah, that let me try it out and see, is this for me? Certainly many physicians fail retirement too. They have ideas. Oh, I'm going to golf, and I'm going to repair small engines, and I'm going to build my own garage, and then they find out that golf gets kind of boring after a while, and digging holes is hard, and they just don't necessarily want to do all those things they thought they would do. And geez, you can just get a new lawnmower for like $400. So yeah, and then they miss maybe the ego stroking that you can get as a physician, right? Sure. And the respect and the sense of purpose and all of that too. So I think it is important to get an opportunity to see what it's like to go for periods of time without the doctor job, and see if that works with your psyche.
So maximize compensation early, have flexibility to pick up extra shifts, especially when you're young and you're maybe more willing to do those things. Make sure your
have more energy.
Make sure your contract's flexible enough to let you do this kind of transition to, what I'm going to say maybe is part-time, less than a 1.0 FTE. I think all that's really good. We always talk about if you miss being paid fairly, even by like 10% over your career, it's worth almost $3 million, right? Over a 25-year career for most physicians. And so I completely agree on the compensation piece. I mean, you have to know what the market is for your services, and you don't want to miss out on that. Right.
Look at the MGMA data. Look at, you don't want to be the guy working at the 80th percentile in terms of production and getting paid 20th percentile, because that happens, and some people become complacent, and they accept all these excuses that come from administration when, you don't want to put yourself in a position where you don't have the option to say no, right? Yeah. So, yeah.
Well, all of this has been awesome. I really appreciate you coming on. Any closing thoughts for anyone who wants to pursue the same path that you went down?
Closing thoughts, I guess I would say that I'm not necessarily someone to look up to or to try to emulate. I would like to see a lot of physicians find peace and happiness in their careers, and I suppose I had some of that, but not enough of it to keep me in the game. So I hope that you can find success where I maybe failed in remaining a physician.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. Let's do it again sometime.
Sounds good. It's good to see you, Kyle.
Thanks, Leif. See ya.
Yep. Bye.